Ellen.
Hi, Karen. Good to see you again.
It's good to see you too. Hey, Dick, it's nice to see you as well. I'm just going to wait and see people join us on Facebook and YouTube. Hi, everybody. Oh, look, a lot of people coming in. This is great. It's so good to see everybody again. It is really nice to see everybody. Thanks for joining me. It's good to be back. I missed everyone.
The pictures from Gettysburg and Antietam were wonderful. It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's so nice, and I have so many more to share. I just kind of got behind, that I've been trying to catch up since I got back. And of course, I'm getting ready for our big event coming up in 2 weeks, which I'll talk about in a second. Let's see who's here. Oh, my friend Mrs. Rankage is here. That's great. Let's see, Michigan, Rhode Island. I am good, thank you. I'm well. And this is great. It's nice to see everybody again after a very interesting week off. So I think for tonight, it is November 1783, and we are at the end of the Revolutionary War. And I, Mrs. Q, I have just returned home to New York City after a 7-year exile. So it is very interesting to be back. Now, I have heard that the official day that the occupying enemies, the British, the English, will be leaving our city in 2 weeks, and that is going to be on November 25th, 1783, and that there are great festivities planned for that day. We'll be having a parade. General Washington and the Army will be coming through the town with various dignitaries. We'll also have toasting and fireworks and a shooting of the cannon. But what I'm most interested in seeing is the British finally lining up on the docks and leaving our land, hopefully forever. And now I hope that many of you are interested in coming out to join us in this celebration. And in your time, that celebration will be occurring on Saturday, November 20th at 1 p.m. This is a tour or an event sponsored by Francis Tavern Museum. And I've just sent everyone the link if you'd like to join us. Tickets are on sale for that event. And I'm sorry to say that that event is not going to be live streamed. Francis Tavern does not live stream their in-person events the way I do when I do them. So if you want to join us, you'll have to be joining us in person on that day. And it's going to be great, great fun as we walk through the town and celebrate the removal of the British. Now, I have received a letter from my sister, Mrs. Van R., who will be joining us that day. I've received a letter from her, and she is on her way to the city to stay with me for a time. And if you have not ever seen her, here is Mrs. Van R. earlier this summer at a garden party. And as you can see, my sister dresses a bit more elegantly than I do. And that is her entering the garden for a party she attended earlier this summer. And I did not go to that, but that is my sister, Mrs. Van R., and she will be joining us that day. So it'll be your opportunity to meet Mrs. Van R. and to speak to her. And I do believe she's going to be dressed a little bit more modestly for our walk through the town, but she will be joining us for the full walk as we go through the city and see what it's like as the British finally take their leave of us. And who knows, you never know who we might run into on our walk. It's possible we could run into Mr. Hamilton as he has returned to the city. He and Mrs. Hamilton and their young boy, Philip, are here, and a whole host of other exiles who've been gone from the city for 7 years have recently returned. So we have all been coming into the city over the last month or so and doing our best to reclaim our homes as best as possible. As you might imagine, there's some, shall we say, difference of opinion over ownership of some of the properties that are here. People like me left 7 years ago in fear of the British occupation. Some of us have returned and have found people living in our homes who now claim that it is their homes, that they've lived here for 7 years, and they may have done some improvements to the home or the property, and they believe that it is their home now. And I expect there will be some legal cases coming up about those arguments over the homes. Now, there are also some people still in the town who have been here through the full occupation. And hopefully when we're walking around together on that Saturday afternoon, we may run into one or two of them and we can ask them what it was like to be living here during that occupation. As for me, oh, I have a hello from my friends in Fredericksburg, Mr. and Mrs. McHugh. It's always good to see you too as well. Thank you for joining me. So as for me, my home is still somewhat intact, as it seems that there were officers and their servants living here in my home. So this is still in pretty decent shape, or at least this room is. Some other parts of the home are not looking so good. In her letter, Mrs. Van R tells me that she is bringing me supplies, a cartload of supplies, which I assume means various things like linens and perhaps a piece of furniture or other types of housewares we might need. And she is also, she said, sending me 2 of her servants to help me get this place in order. As she says, you know, that that's not work that any kind of lady ought to be doing. So she'll be lending me a couple of her servants as well to help get the house in order. The store is a mess, as I believe it had been used for storage for British troops and their supplies and suppliers and weapons. The store is a mess, and Mr. Q is working on cleaning that out and getting it back into shape. As of course, you know, there is a great question about when trade will resume, so I'm really not sure when my store will be full again. And hopefully if we run into Mr. Hamilton, I'll be able to ask him a little bit about that, the plans for trade and financing and property ownership. As one of the things I am very interested in is that now that we are no longer under the yoke of British rule, that hopefully ladies will no longer be seen as property of the men and their families and will be able to own our own property as the Dutch ladies did before us. As many of you know who've been following me for a time, I did inherit this property and business from my father. But it is not in my name, as I, under British rule, could not own any of this. So the true inheritor of this was Mr. Q. And although I have no worries about what Mr. Q would do with my property, as you can guess, you know, that would be a grave concern for some families who only had daughters to inherit property, knowing that the gentleman the daughter would marry would be the true inheritor of that property. And of course, if you worked very hard for that, whether it is a farm or a business of some type, you might want to be sure that the gentleman inheriting that property would take good care of it, and not sell it for money, or, you know, gamble it all away or drink it away, or be victim to any of those other types of vices. Now, you probably know about the British rule of primogeniture, where in the British tradition, everything is inherited by the oldest son. And that really wasn't carried out here in the American colonies. No man and his wife, who worked for many years, day and night, to build something successful, would leave it to an older son who was irresponsible or incapable, simply because he was the oldest son. So we dropped that tradition long ago. But in the case of my father, he had only 2 daughters. So his choice was to leave the property to one of his daughters or sell everything and leave us the money in the form of a dowry of some kind. So of course, all of these changes to me are bringing up all kinds of memories of my father and taking over his business and how that all came to be, and the lessons I learned from my father about running a successful business that I hope are going to serve me now, that I'm going to have to use all of that knowledge to rebuild everything here, as everything is gone, is in tatters. And Mr. Q and I, of course, have our property and we have our savings and things, but the business itself will have to be rebuilt. And I am hoping that some of the middlemen that I have been using to trade will be back, and that we'll be working together quickly so that we can reestablish trade here in the city, and that people can start buying what they need and we can all get on with things. Now, also on the tour, we'll be showing you a little bit of the town. A quarter of our town was burned. And we will be talking about that Trinity Church is no longer here, a very sad thing that that beautiful landmark is gone. And also, do you know, in the last 4 months, 140,000 people have passed through our small town. Our little tiny town, 140,000 people have come through, because all of the people fleeing this land to be under British protection have all had to come through New York to board those ships and leave. So for months, people have been crowding through the town and leaving on British ships to British islands in the Caribbean or to Canada. So that has been quite a thing to see, this massive transient population. I'm really just catching the end of that, but some of the people I've met have told me that it has been very dangerous as all of these strange people have been moving through the town, and that some of the ladies in the town had actually taken, to carrying a knife tucked into their dresses or jackets to defend themselves just in case they were robbed. So that has all been very interesting as well. So certainly not the city I remember leaving, behind. So a lot of changes. Now, I hope many of you will come out and join us, or those of you in the New York City area will come out and join us for our wonderful walk through New York City on Evacuation Day. Now, I am thinking about my father quite a bit, returning here now and facing starting the business now without him, the very business that he built so many years ago. And I don't know if I told you that much about my father, but my father originally was a trader from Naples, in the country that you in your time will call Italy, which does not exist yet in my time. So Naples is kind of a separate little entity over there on the boot of that island, and or the boot of that peninsula, I should say. And you may also not know that all of European goods that came into the colonies had to come through England or on English ships. So in the case of my father's family, which was a very old trading family, all of their goods coming into America had to come via London and ships from London, or ships that were trading from the Mediterranean right to New York. And that was how my father made his first journey here to New York, as a representative of his father's and his grandfather's merchant business in Naples. And my father eventually decided to stay here, as he thought he would have a much greater future here in this new world. He enjoyed it very much, and sent for his young wife, my mother, who came. And I think I told you before, my mother was a mantua maker or a dressmaker, and a very fine dressmaker indeed, and that she made dresses for all of the lovely ladies of the Hudson Valley. And that is how my sister, Mrs. Van R, became Mrs. Van R, marrying into one of the oldest and wealthiest families in the Hudson Valley. And she'll tell you a little bit about herself when you get to meet her on the 20th and how that all came about. Growing up, I always took an interest in my father's business here, and can remember being a girl and spending time here in the shop and being very fascinated by the exchange of goods and money. And he would often let me keep the ledger book for people who were buying on credit. He taught me all about credit. And see, someone wants to join us, just a moment. He taught me all about credit and how much credit to extend to a customer, and how to maybe size up a customer to see if they were a good risk for credit, and how to, what's the word I'm looking for? Properly remind a customer that they were behind on their debt. So he taught me all about managing, his ledger books and managing the credit ledger books, and how to diplomatically deal with people over their bills. And he took me with him to visit the ships and the ship captains as he inspected the goods that were coming in. And then that way I got to know and not fear the ship captains, as many young ladies would be very fearful of some of these gentlemen who can be quite rough and loud in their mannerisms. So he taught me very young not to be afraid of these gentlemen, and they afforded me the same respect they did to my father. Although I think when I was a young girl, they probably were just more than anything amused that I was tagging along with my father to visit their ships. But as I grew older, I think they began to realize that it was me, then Miss C, who they would be one day dealing with in the future, and they became much more polite and conversational with me over time, in teaching me also about what ship captains do and the importance of when they time their journeys and weather and times of the year, and dealing with their crew members and how they handle all of that, and how to inspect goods, and what kind of expectation to have for the timing of the arrival of goods. Because, one of the important things is that we always want to buy goods coming from somewhere else for less than we will be selling them for in our store. So there's a bit of timing that goes on there as well. And some of that timing is dependent on those ship captains. So I learned to be on very good terms with them, and to understand their role, and to be respectful of them as well. And they have all served me very well over the years, learning to do that. So my father taught me that as well. He taught me how to, manage the inventory in the store. He taught me how to place the classified ads, how to write them and word them, and what order to put things in to make the ad most attractive. But as you can guess, after I inherited the store myself, I did change things a bit from the way my father did them. Now, my father's store initially dealt with many imports from Europe: olive oil, olives, different types of pickled fish and things like that, pickled delicacies from Europe, linens, silks, brocades, all of these sorts of things for men and for ladies that would come from Europe. And of course, many things that came from England as well. So my father's shop was more of a general type of shop, dealing with European and English goods. But after I took over the shop, I turned it more into a shop for ladies, and began to concentrate more on things that I understood, because I understood the ladies. So my shop would generally have more things in it appealing to the ladies. Of course, still all of the different fabrics from many different places: fabrics from India, fabrics from China, fabrics from Europe, from Scotland and Ireland and England, and of course our local fabrics from here in the colonies, and wools, but also other things ladies might like. Jewelry. My father also sold Italian jewelry, lovely jewelry. So I also would sell jewelry, perfumes, of course, different types of hair powders, hair pomades, and all types of things that ladies might like: ribbons, bows, lace, all types of things for ladies you'd find in my shop, and not generally foodstuffs. I stopped selling the foodstuffs. So I had neighbors, of course, from whom you could buy those lovely imported olives and olive oils and things like that if you wanted them. I kind of gave that up over time, because it really wasn't my specialty. My father really understood that much better than I did. So I kind of dropped those items off. Now, you also might know that Mr. Q was a fur trader for many years. So Mr. Q is very savvy at picking fur pelts. So we do have an array of furs, when we're able to get them, that Mr. Q is able to pick for us. But Mr. Q, over the years, since the war, has become a gunsmith, and we'll be opening up a little annex here in our home and shop. Will he be repairing and making guns? So that was a trade he developed during his years in the war with General Washington, and he's become quite fond of it. So I think Mr. Q will be continuing his work as a gunsmith now, as we reopen the store here. Now, my father also taught me many, many other things about how to be, let's say, politically savvy. Now, some of you might know that Mrs. Arnold's wife, Peggy Shippen Arnold, that Miss Shippen was also taught these things by her father, Mr. Shippen of Philadelphia, a very successful merchant family that she came from. And the rumor had it that she was the most intelligent of his children. So he taught her most of their business. And of course, that only meant the financial aspect of the business and the inventory aspect of the business, but the political aspect of your business too, right? Because in order for your business to be successful, you have to have a little bit of political savvy and know how to deal with the various political leaders in your town, or in our case, our common council, and our, in New York, many political factions. And my father taught me very well, I think, about how to deal with many different political factions and kind of walk a line between all of them, because what you want are customers. And so you don't want your own political beliefs to get in the way of running your business. And my father did participate in a couple of very controversial political activities. The first was joining in a Northeastern boycott against the Sugar and Molasses Act, which you might remember was quite crippling to New England. It taxed the sugar and molasses moving around in the colonies from port to port. And that was a crippling tax for our friends in New England. And my father entered into a boycott of England over that tax. But you may know that we were not able to get our Southern friends to agree to that particular non-importation deal and non-exportation deal, as at that time our Southern friends really didn't see any interest in supporting the Northeastern colonies. So that political activity, although it was very popular in New York and Rhode Island and Connecticut and New England, kind of fell on its face when you got south of Delaware. So that didn't work out so well. But what I do remember, and by that time I was a young lady and married, was the boycott against the Stamp Act. And that incredible meeting he brought me to, not that many days away was the anniversary, on November 1st of the year 1765. So, wow, can it be 23 years ago? Can I be that old? I guess I must be. I guess I must be, as I was already a married lady at that time. I went with my father to the meeting at the Burns Coffee House, where 200 of us entered our names onto a non-importation, non-exportation agreement against England, against the Stamp Act. And as you might know, the Stamp Act was quite difficult for all of us, and that all of our documents were taxed. Now, for a merchant, that meant that all of our bills of sale were taxed, our ship manifests were taxed, any invoicings were taxed, any documents that we used in communication were taxed, inventory documents, all documents that we would use in the course of conducting our business would be taxed. And I remember the thing that infuriated my father the most, our advertisements were taxed. So even the advertisement we placed in the newspaper was taxed. And of course, the printer was taxed as well. So there were piles and piles of these taxes on all of our documents. And this enraged my father and all of the merchants in the town. And as you might know, the legal documents were taxed too. So our friends, the lawyers, were also quite angry, and the printers. And at that time, it was well known that the three groups you did not want to anger in the colonial city of New York were lawyers, merchants, and printers, who would see to your downfall if at all possible. And I clearly remember that night going there with my father, goodness, 23 years ago now, at the Burns Coffee House, where the proclamation was made that we would engage in no trade with England, nothing from English ships, no goods from England or that came through England or that came on English ships. We would accept goods from other countries that came on other ships, but not the English ships, and that we would do this until the Stamp Act was repealed. This, of course, was going to mean economic hardship for us, as most of our goods did come on those English ships or were made in England. But we all agreed that the hardship was a better thing to do than to allow England to be successful in this tax, because if they were successful in this one, they wouldn't stop there. They would continue going. So we knew that at some point we had to stand firmly and oppose the progression of these taxes. And these taxes, you might remember, were placed on us by a parliament that we elected no representatives to. So we were not against taxes of all kinds. We agreed to taxes imposed by our local governments, and we also agreed to the tariffs on trade to help support the British Empire. What we did not agree to were the taxes on us imposed by the parliament, the members of which we did not elect. So just a little fine point there to make sure you understand how we were thinking then. They also declared at that meeting, some of the gentlemen stood up and said that before they would abide by the stamp tax, that they would sell their businesses and go live as artisans on the frontier. They would go out to the frontier to their original craftsmanship, whatever it might have been, whether they were blacksmiths, or one gentleman had been a leathersmith. He said he would go out and continue to resume making leather somewhere out in the frontier, that he would leave the city, that the merchants would simply pack up, leave the cities, and go engage in other types of activities. So it was a very interesting night. And although 200 merchants signed it that night, including my father, by January, over 400 had agreed to that. So that was one of the times I remember my father engaging in a very controversial political activity. And as you might know, people in the town who supported England were incredibly angry at the merchants who did that. And it wasn't unusual that some of them would come into the shop and express their outrage at my father for entering into such an agreement, but the majority was on our side. And as you know, the merchants in the other colonial towns agreed with us, and eventually we were successful, and the Stamp Act was repealed. So I learned from my father then that there are times when one does have to take a political stand, that there are times where it is important to do so and to stand united and together in order to succeed. As my father would say, united we are strong, divided we are weak. We can only stand against England if we are united. Miss Aseri is here from Setauket, my good friends from Setauket, who I'll be visiting again in the not too distant future, and recording some video for you from Setauket. So look for my future visits to some very interesting place in Setauket. I have someone from Ms. Reed who says she spent the day in Lower Manhattan and toured France's Tavern. Excellent, wonderful museum, France's Tavern Museum. And by the way, the tour going on November 20th is for the benefit of France's Tavern Museum. So come out, buy your tickets, and help raise some money for France's Tavern Museum. So we are all doing there. Oh, I see also here tonight is Mrs. Langdon, and I'm going to be visiting Mrs. Langdon in a few weeks at a 17th century Dutch cemetery in Staten Island, and I will be bringing you video of that visit as well. I'm so much looking forward to that. That's going to be quite interesting, and a whole lot more of you here tonight. Thank you. So the stamp tax was the first time I recall my father really taking a difficult political stand, one that would endanger the operation of his business. But as he explained to me, sometimes one has to do that. And then, of course, 9 years later came the Tea Act and the Boston Tea Party. By then, my father had moved up to Haverstraw with my mother, and it was then my decision to join up with the next non-importation agreement in 1775 against England. And I joined up with our fellow merchants once again in that agreement. And that one was even more difficult, as the town was much more divided over the Tea Act than we were over the Stamp Act. And some people who supported us very loudly during the Stamp Act, turned against us during the Tea Act and became loyalists. So it wasn't that easy to predict from that first time we joined up who would join us maybe the second time and ultimately the third time when it was time to sign up and go to war. And as you know, Mr. Q and I were patriots or Whigs, and Mr. Q went off and fought with General Washington, while I spent some time with my mother, who then quickly dispatched me off to my sister, as she proclaimed that neither of us knew how to actually do anything useful anymore, and that I would be better off with my sister and her servants. And off I went to Albany with my daughter. Young Mr. Q also fought in the war. And I'm sorry to say that both of my parents did pass away during the time of the war, so that they're both gone now. And so it is just Mr. Q and me and our children. And of course, my sister, Mrs. Van R, and her very big extended family. I think I forgot to tell you that Mrs. Van R is cousin by marriage to Mrs. Hamilton, and of course knows the Hamiltons very well. So if we run into Mr. Hamilton on the tour, I'm sure they'll be very happy to see each other. We have all been socializing in Albany over the last couple of years, so we've all got to know each other quite well, but it is quite a bit of distinction that my sister has married into such a prominent family as the Van R family. And she'll be down to walk around the town with us. I am also working on something lovely to wear for you, so you won't want to miss that. For those of you who can't make it to New York for our walk through Evacuation Day, I will be posting, of course, a lot of pictures and video of the event after it's over. And I'm sorry it's not going to live stream, but I will be live streaming some events of my own. So some of the events I do have planned coming up for you live streams next year, and these will be in-person tours and live stream tours. I think we're going to have a walk through New York with Mr. Madison and Mr. Hamilton. So that would be Congressman Madison and Treasury Secretary Hamilton, and I will join them on a walk through New York. I know you'll want to join us for that, to listen to these two incredibly intelligent men air out their differences over the government. It will be quite fascinating to hear them. Two very intelligent and very different types of men, I think you know. And I have just been discussing with some of the ladies that I think in the spring when it's warm, we're going to have a ladies walk through New York, and 3 or 4 of us will get together, and you'll be able to join the ladies of Federalist period New York, and we will walk around and tell you all about what our lives were like after the Revolutionary War. So I think that will come up in the spring. And also, I don't think this will happen in the winter because it might be too cold, but it might, is going to be our wonderful evening at the Ketchum Inn in Center Moriches, Long Island, where we are planning a total 18th century night for you. Now, you do not have to dress up to join us there. If you want to dress up, you're welcome to. We won't turn you away. But some of us will be dressed up, and you will be treated to a full 18th century evening, a tour of the inn. Also, the ladies and gentlemen will be entering through separate doors as they would have done at that time, and will be led into separate rooms. We'll take our tour, and then you will be joined at your dinner tables with people from the time period, and we will all be discussing things that are going on the date that we choose. And that date hasn't been selected yet, but I'll be talking about timely topics, and there'll be one person at each of your tables to talk to you about what's going on. And I hear, that there are also, redcoats wandering around, banging on doors without search warrants, demanding entry to various buildings. And I hope that doesn't happen to us that night at the Ketchum Inn, but you never know. Something like that could happen. We could be invaded by redcoats. So it'll be a wonderful full 18th century evening for you. All of the food will be 18th century correct, cooked on the hearth with authentic utensils, all authentic ingredients by really master 18th century chef Diane Schwind, and everything will be wonderful. And I'll be telling you more about plans for that and the ticket prices for that. And that, of course, will all be to raise money for continuing restoration of the Ketchum Inn. If you have not seen my video about the Ketchum Inn, check it out. It's on YouTube and it is on Facebook, and you'll get an idea of what our night is going to be like. We're really excited to be bringing you this and other events like that. I think maybe we're going to have some graveyard walks in Setauket and some other things. Oh, also, how could I forget? In 2 weeks, I'm going to be visiting the home of Culper Jr., Raynham Hall, the home of Robert Townsend. I'm going to be getting a private tour by the museum director, and I will be bringing that to you in a video as well. And I'm sure you'll enjoy that. I have never been there, and I've been wanting to go there for many years. Oh, those lobster backs always ruining people's fun. Indeed, they are. And if you saw, oh, Miss Arceri is excited for the Ketchiman event. I'm excited for it too. It's going to be wonderful. I don't know if you saw the video of me getting a lesson and from a red coat. I think it's just called Mrs. Q Meets a Red Coat on Facebook and YouTube. But, you know, I want to know for you ladies who saw that video, I have to make sure Mr. Q's not listening. I think he's busy. Was he not the most handsome redcoat you've ever seen? I mean, oh, Mrs. Healy has her thumb up over here on Zoom. Was he not an incredibly good-looking Englishman? Oh, I think he was a Welshman. They were a Welsh regiment. So incredibly handsome young man, I must say. Maybe we can get him to be our visiting redcoat at the Ketchiman. All you ladies can see him in person. Oh, 6'2" and incredibly good looking. Well, I have to maybe get my fan out here if I can find it. I'm much too old for him, but some of you younger ladies may be interested in meeting him. He's quite good looking. So do you have any questions or comments? I see there's someone here. The comments are going by so fast from Manassas. I love Manassas. I have visited there many times. I didn't go on my visit last week. Last week was mostly Antietam and Gettysburg, but I do love Manassas. It is also a beautiful place. That colony called Virginia is quite beautiful, as Mr. Madison tells me all the time, but Virginia is quite beautiful, and that place that I think is going to break off and be called West Virginia is quite beautiful as well, as is Western Maryland, Southern Pennsylvania. Our country certainly is an incredibly beautiful one to travel through, and Mr. Q and I enjoyed getting away from this crazy city very much. Yes, it is also Guy Fawkes Day, the 5th of November. For you guys in 2021, I don't think I even want to touch that. I hear there are quite interesting things happening in 2021, but for now we'll stick to 1783, where we are rejoicing that we have at last thrown off our oppressors, that we were smart enough to not be fooled by their propaganda to divide us, and that we ourselves came together in spite of those attempts, joined up in spite of our many differences and disagreements, so that we could get rid of the English, come back to our town, and get back to having our differences. Because of course, when you have total government, you have no differences of opinion. So in New York, we value our differences of opinion. So it's quite good to have the English gone, and to know that we'll soon be back to arguing amongst ourselves again, and finding solutions to our issues by arguing them out in the way we always have here in New York. And of course, we're also quite curious about what sort of government we'll be getting. And I might be speaking to General Washington about that on our tour, as General Washington will be there as well. So thank you all for coming out to join me tonight. It's a pleasure seeing everyone again. I really missed everyone last week, and I'll see you next week, and we'll talk a little bit more, I think, about the end of the war and what's going on in some of the other places in the colonies. And then the following week, I won't be here because one of the gentlemen on the tour is going to be staying here with Mr. Q and me. So I won't be doing this in 2 weeks, but hopefully I'll be seeing a bunch of you on that tour. So, if you're in the New York City metro area, plan to come out and join us the afternoon of November 20th. The tour won't be that long, from 1 to 2:30. Be a nice afternoon tour. And I'm looking forward to seeing as many of you who can make it as possible. So thank you all so much. And I will see you, on social media this week, and in person a week from tonight. Thank you all for joining me.